good leader gets it right 7 times out of 10. If you get it right 10 times out of 10, you're not trying enough things. The trick is to try things and to retreat with humility, but don't be scared to try them. And that was the best single piece of advice that I've ever received.
Today's guest is Philip Rodney, with over 40 years of experience, formerly chair of Paull. He now continues to share his insights through publications like The Times and The Lawyer.
So in terms of the talent to take the firm forward, what different talents do you need for leadership?
I think vision and ambition, a sense of direction, where you want to take the firm. And the more ambitious, the better. I had this third rule, which is that if you're putting a vision to a team, if a third of them enthusiastically support it, a third of them will go along with it, and a third of them want to kill you, it's about right. If you wait for the final third, it'll be too late. So you have to have confidence in it.
Looking ahead now, so what factors, market or otherwise, do you think are going to affect partner and firm success, going forward, thinking of things like AI, agile working?
I think we're at a really fascinating point because...
Welcome to Beyond Billables, lessons from top law firm partners, the podcast where renowned and well-known law firm partners reveal the secrets of their success. I'm Stephen Rodney, formerly co-founder of Fox Rodney Search, previously one of the best-known legal headhunters, and now founder of Integrate Coaching, where we produce tailor-made lateral integration programs for partners joining new firms. I'm really delighted today to be joined by Philip Rodney. I would hasten to add no relation. Originally a litigator, Philip was a lawyer for more than 40 years, rising from being head of litigation at Burness in Scotland to becoming chair of that firm in 2005. Burness was then a well-regarded mid-market firm with offices in Edinburgh and Glasgow, and Philip and his partners set an ambition to make it a leading Scottish independent law firm. This they managed to achieve, along the way merging with Paull and Williamson's in Aberdeen. Philip stayed as chair until he retired from practice in 2018. Since then, he's been on a number of boards, written columns for a number of publications, most notably The Times, and acted as a consultant to businesses in a variety of sectors. His principal role now is as senior advisor to Saxton Banfield, the London-headquartered executive search and leadership advisory firm, where he's worked for 3 years, helping them with their professional services practice. So a very warm welcome to you, Philip.
Thank you very much.
Good. So, Philip, tell us a little bit about your journey to becoming a lawyer and then to becoming a partner.
Well, I didn't really set out to become a lawyer. I actually always wanted to be a journalist. But my father appealed to my baser instincts. He knew that I loved cars, and he said to me, if you become a journalist, you might just afford a second-hand Beetle. Whereas if you did law, you'd be able to indulge your passion. P.S. Actually, I'd really love a second-hand Beetle now. So
if anyone listening has got one, they can get in touch and
yes,
they'll find a willing buyer. Sorry, go on.
So I went to Strathclyde University to study law, and while I was there, actually, I did fulfill part of my journalistic ambition, because I took over the editorship of what was imaginatively called the Journal of the Law Society of Strathclyde University, and I changed its title to Leisure Footwear, made the content a lot more scurrilous, and suddenly people were listening to, or reading it, I should say. So that was bit of my journalism passion fulfilled. I then trained at McGregor Donald, which was at that stage the biggest law firm in Scotland. And after I'd completed my apprenticeship, as it was then, I went to a boutique law firm, Alexander Stone and Co., and I became a partner there. And it merged in 1998 with Burness. And as you say, I was a litigation partner there, then moved to be head of litigation, and eventually ended up as chair.
Okay, so when you, from joining Burness to becoming a partner, was that a very smooth process from your side?
I was a partner in Alexander Stone and Co. I'd become a partner there. So I became a partner. I mean, it sounds ridiculous now, 4 years after I'd qualified. That's what happened in these days. And so when we joined Burness in 1998, I had already been a partner for a while.
So what is being a successful partner from your point of view, Philip, apart from billing a lot? And how do you think the skills you possess have helped to make you a successful partner? What do you think the top few attributes are for being successful?
I think the first point is, and it sounds corny, but it's true, is integrity. I
Right.
think that has to be your North Star. You know, you are, after all, an officer of the court,
Mm,
and acting with integrity is really important. I think the second point I would make is, you know, the clues in the word partner, that you
mm,
are working with other people. It is about working with your team, working with your clients, and not, you know, trying to be a superstar. Um, and I think the third point is, Darwin is often misquoted as saying that it was about survival of the fittest. In fact, it was about survival of the most adaptable. And I think
okay.
it's learning to be adaptable because, you know, in the course of a 40 plus year career,
Mm,
things change,
mm,
and it's learning to be able to adapt to these changes. I
mm,
think these are the attributes. And of course, doing the hard yards, it's not an easy job.
mm,
You
mm.
have to have the energy to put into it. But I think these are the attributes I would think for a successful partner.
You, as a litigator, I mean, is that something that you wanted to do immediately upon qualifying, or how did you come to be a litigator?
I think it was a process of elimination. I
Okay.
spent my first 6 months of my traineeship in what would now be called private client, and I hated it. And then I spent my second 6 months in, again, what would now be called real estate, and I
Mm,
hated it. And I thought, oh, you know, maybe I have to be a journalist after all. And then I went into litigation. I loved it, and I never looked back. So I didn't really. Actually, if I'd thought of my personality, it's probably the
mm,
last thing that I would have thought I would have ended
mm.
up in. But it's something that I really enjoyed.
Okay, I wonder how many other lawyers choose their specialism of the process of elimination from a negative point of view. I suspect quite a few.
Yeah. Doesn't sound terribly inspiring, but it's pragmatism.
It's honest. And when you mentioned the attributes that you just listed, so how long did it take you? I mean, I'll assume that integrity was one that you realized pretty early on. But the other couple, how long did it take you to realize that these were really key attributes? How was your learning experience of being a partner?
I think I remember Ronald Reagan said that you can achieve a lot more by acknowledging the contribution of others. And I learned that if I knew what my strengths were, but I also knew what my weaknesses were.
Mm,
And so actually knowing that I could collaborate with other people who could help me, you know, that was something that I picked up fairly early. The adaptability one was, you know, just I'm someone who likes change. And so leaning into change rather than being scared of it, again, was
mm.
something that I learned early on.
Okay. You've mentioned already Darwin and Reagan. We've already been going 10 minutes, so I'm very interested to see who else you can mention by the end, and you couldn't have two more different types of quotes from Darwin and Reagan, Ronald Reagan. Um, so obviously you talked about how Burness merged with you as chair. So in relation to that merger, and the firm obviously must have changed. So did the attributes of success you've listed, were they common when you were in a very small firm to when you became chair in a much larger firm, or do you think they change at all depending on the firm you're in?
It's really interesting. I actually think it's easier leading a bigger firm than a small
Right.
firm. In a small firm, everybody thinks that they've got a lead role. There's a
Mm,
much more of an understanding of a hierarchy in a bigger firm. So, you know, that actually peculiarly was a bit easier. I think the question of adaptability, you know, is
mm,
one which is much more important in a small firm, because you have to do a bit of everything, and actually bringing that into a big firm, I think, was a help. I think
mm,
that, you know, is something which, you know, I tried to embody in the culture that we had there. You know, that we had to look beyond our small compartments
mm.
and not think in terms of silos, but think about the contribution that we could make to the firm as a whole. So I think these were attributes that, peculiarly, actually I brought from a small firm to a big firm and actually worked quite well.
Obviously, as a leader, suddenly became chair relatively early in your career. I can't quite work out how early it was. Was leadership something you always aspired to, or did it was it thrust upon you because no one else wanted to do it, or how did it work?
It was never something I set out to do.
Mm.
When I was with Alexander Stone, I remember, I would do things because I was frustrated because, they weren't getting done. And I think when I moved to Burness, there was a sense that I thought that a litigation team could perform better. And I didn't set out to lead the team, but people wanted me to share these ideas and that vision. And likewise, when I became chair, it's not something I set out to do, but those around me thought that I had the talent to take the firm forward. So I'm kind of an accidental leader.
Yeah. So, in terms of the talent to take the firm forward, what do you think what different talents do you need for leadership than for being a jobbing partner from your point of view?
I think vision and ambition,
Okay.
a sense of, direction where, you want to take the firm. And I think that, and the more ambitious, the better. I worked with an excellent managing partner, and we split the role very much on the basis that my head was in the clouds and his feet were on the ground. So it's that excitement and ambition, but tempered by someone who can see how to deliver it. I think that's what important is important. So it's a mixture of these things, but it's I don't think one should ever be penalized for having a big vision or a big ambition, but you have to, test that against reality.
Yes, and how easy was that? Because I mean, back in the 90s, in Scotland, you're with a firm that initially with Burness was quite well known from I
Yeah,
remember it
yeah,
as a
yeah.
recruiter, but it wasn't seen as one of sort of the like McGregor Donald was seen. So you came up with this vision, and how easy was it for you to get your partners to buy into that?
It wasn't easy. And I had this third rule, which is
Okay.
that if you're putting a vision to a team, if a third of them enthusiastically support it, a third of them will go along with it, and a third of them want to kill you, it's about right. And if you wait for the final third who want to kill you, it'll be too late. So you have to have confidence in it. And when I put the vision to the firm initially, a good third did want to kill me, but
Mhm.
I think you have to stretch yourself. But
Mhm.
we also benefited from circumstances at that stage,
Mhm.
the so-called Big Four, which was McGregor's, McLeay's, Shepherd's, and Dundas and Wilson were all
Yeah.
trying to reinvent themselves in the London market and had
Mm.
taken their eye off the ball in Scotland. And that gave us and also Brodie's the opportunity to really focus and build our practices there. So a lot of it was vision, a lot of it was execution, but there was some luck.
Well, there's always luck, I think, isn't there? I always remember Gary. Let's bring another quote. Gary Player saying, the harder I practice, the luckier I get.
Yeah.
So I always remember that, and I think that's the same for a lot of different passions or whatever wherever you're working.
And
So
it's about seeing that opportunity and going for it,
yeah, yes,
not being
yes,
scared. Yeah, yeah,
yeah. And lawyers aren't renowned for well, they're renowned for being risk averse, obviously, and as a litigator, lots of litigators are maybe too risk averse.
yeah,
But it's interesting to see how many litigators have become heads of firms in the last 20, 25 years, far more than perhaps previous to that, I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that's right. I think they bring a different perspective,
Mm.
as compared with corporate lawyers.
Yeah. And in terms of the merger that you helped to engineer,
Yeah.
I mean, without sort of going to huge detail, how did that come about?
I think that what we recognise that if we were going to be a leading firm in Scotland, we
Mm.
had to have presence in the three major cities, Edinburgh, Glasgow, and Aberdeen. And we
Mm.
also had to be able to cover all the sectors. And what we were missing was an Aberdeen office and also an energy practice. Paull and Williamson's was definitely the leader in both these, both geographically and in terms of sector. And everybody had knocked on their door. And I went up with Ian Watty, our managing partner, and had a chat with them, and they were very polite and told us to go away. I had a second go at it, and they were equally polite. And then one day, the then senior partner phoned up and said, "Yes, let's have a chat." And actually, when we sat down, we saw that there were genuine synergies, and that, one-on-one, to reflect the cliche, would genuinely make three. And it, on paper, it looked great. But as you know, actually
Mm.
making these things happen is a lot more difficult. There's a lot of energy that goes into it. But it was very successful, and it was transformational in terms of our position in the market. It gave us bulk, it gave us skills, it gave us profile. So it worked out very, very well.
And how did you handle, you've mentioned obviously the amount of work that goes into a merger. So how did you handle the complex integration issues which are thrown up by a merger?
I mean, it's all about people, and getting to know them. I used to be up in Aberdeen every week because I need to know them. I learned by my mistakes as well.
Okay.
Um, you have to know where to fight your battles and where not to. So
Mm.
one of my big mistakes is something which is referred to in our history as chocolate gate. Um,
Right.
because Paul and Williamson's always used to have in their reception area a big box of chocolates, and we thought, well, that doesn't look corporate enough, and we thought we'll get rid of the chocolates, and there was more reaction against that than anything else. So we retreated, and the chocolates went back.
I'm laughing because those kind of things happen so often. I did think
Yeah.
when you mentioned Chocolate Gate, there was a famous Chocolate Gate instance at Nabarra's, which we won't go into, which involved a Christmas party and something made in chocolate. But that's much more
You could tell
interesting.
me offline.
Yeah, I'll tell you offline about that one. But it is interesting how I can imagine you thinking, "Oh yeah, let's just get rid of no one will notice," and then
Yeah, yeah.
everyone's frustrations come out when the chocolate disappears. And look, I'm interested in particular because it was a three office merger, but your two offices were on their own, and then Pauls and Williamsons had the Aberdeen office. So that's very different. Did
Yeah.
you swap people around so there were different partners moved around to help on the integration?
Actually, less so than perhaps might have been ideal, because the northeast is 150 miles, 2.5 hours away by train, so that was harder to do. So really, rather than physically um,
Mm.
swapping people around, it was to get people to work on projects together. So
Okay.
it was more a sort of virtual integration. So in big projects, ensuring that we had talent from all offices working together. There was less physical swapping than perhaps I would have ideally wanted, but it worked very well.
Mm.
Because people got to know each other working in teams, and as I say, I always encouraged people, even if they weren't um, based in another office, to move around. And I say I always went up there every week, and Ian did as well, and people came down. So um, I think working together like that, actually meshed us well.
Look, it's excellent. Doesn't sound like there's too many conflicts because often when there's a merger, sometimes you don't realize until the merger happens, there's some personality conflicts or some kind of weird work related, not actual conflicts, but just sort of conflicts in people's heads that come out. It doesn't sound like you had any of those or not too many
No,
of
no,
those
no,
issues.
no, 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 no. I mean, there's sort of different views and different perspectives, and that's healthy.
Mhm.
I think that amount of challenge is good. I think when you have a merger and maybe one firm is larger than the other at the start, you have to be careful to have some humility. I saw it with my own merger. from Alexander Stone, we were much smaller than the Burness partnership, but they took on board a lot of our culture, the way we did things, and you have to do that. You can't just assume because you're the dominant force in a merger that you've got everything right. The things to be learned, so you have to keep your ears and eyes open and have a degree of humility.
Yes. So humility, I wonder if that's an attribute of success for partners as well, having humility as opposed to being arrogant and just
Yeah,
stamping all
yeah,
over people.
yeah.
Uh,
Undoubtedly, and as I was saying in the context of the word partner, that's what it should be about.
yes. Yes.
Yeah,
So moving on to, I'm presuming, I don't know in detail, but I'm presuming you were directly or indirectly responsible for, recruiting laterals,
yes,
when the pre-merger or particularly maybe post-merger as the
yeah,
firm grew.
yeah.
So what are the two or three reasons that you saw that they either succeeded or failed when you recruited them?
Um, I mean, I think that it's working out whether genuinely, that they're going to fit or not. Um, it's not. I mean, again, sort of learning from mistakes. At one stage in the evolution of Burness, we went to the market to try and find stars from other firms,
Right.
and we brought in 4 or 5 people, and that failed.
Okay.
Just bringing people because of stars and other firms doesn't work. It's to understand both how they fit into the structure and how they fit in as people. So I think doing due diligence about who they are is really important. And the other thing is, when they arrive, ensuring that they've got a supportive platform that
Yeah.
helps them, prosper. And one thing I was just reflecting on the other day was how often actually bringing their PA with them, was helpful. Giving them some familiarity and support. Sounds, and it doesn't sound obvious, but that sometimes made an enormous contribution. And, if there were 2 people coming from a firm, again, that tended to
Yeah.
work a lot better. And it was also learning, where people were in their careers. I think the best lateral hires we made were people who were hungry and perhaps had got lost in a logjam in another firm, but really wanted to prove themselves, rather than those who were self-satisfied and, felt that they achieved everything that they had and brought with them a sense of entitlement.
Well, as you know, what I'm doing now is helping on the integration side with lateral recruits. And so I'm interested when you talked about, stars being recruited in and not really working. And that often happens, I think, if people are just recruited for who they are without the DD. Did
Yeah.
your firm, I mean, it was, again, quite a while ago, but in terms of the integration of those people, you talked about, maybe helping to bring their PAs over, but did you have your formal integration plans for these people that arrived, or was it very much, well, you thought, well, they know what they're doing, let's just get on with it?
We did. We did have plans and processes. I think when I think back on them, sometimes they could have been better. Sometimes
Mm,
actually having someone external who they could have
mm,
spoken to about their challenges and difficulties might have been helpful.
mm,
Certainly, when I made the move into the merger with Burness, I know that with the benefit of hindsight, it would have been great to be able to have spoken to someone who could have helped me with that. But we did have processes, and I think we got
mm,
most of it right. We didn't place heavy demands on people immediately they came in the door. We
mm,
respected the fact that the integration was going to take a while. We recognized that we weren't buying a book of business. We
mm.
were investing in people. It was looking at their potential, rather than, their black book. But I think it's something which is so important. And if you don't invest time and energy in it, and if you don't have the people within the firm who can, properly focus on it, you're wasting, an opportunity.
Yeah, you're wasting and also wasting huge amounts of money on
Absolutely.
doing it. And it's interesting you mentioned about having people in the firm who can really focus on it because I think there's often a feeling that the sponsor of the partner who's being brought in should focus on their integration, which is obviously correct,
Yeah.
but they may not be the right. They may have been the right person to recruit that partner, but may not be the right person to help integrate the partner because there are different skills needed with all those different aspects. And so it's something which I think more firms are realizing that they have to, it's really should be seen and is being seen by a lot more firms as part of the recruitment, the end part of the recruitment process, rather than some sort of standalone process when someone arrives. But it is amazing still, how many laterals don't work out and how firms are quite don't really analyze in a lot of detail what they could have done better. They blame the lateral for it not working out, but don't really analyze what they could have done better. The more I'm doing the integration, the more I find that some of the issues that partners laterals have, they are personal issues. They're personal doubts. I'm not a therapist. I always hasten to add, but there are issues which people raise which they just wouldn't in a million years raise internally with any coach or anyone else, and their insecurities come out on a move. And I think I find it fascinating that people who are very confident outwardly, actually, when they make a move, their insecurities come out. And I'm wondering with some of your stars that didn't work out, whether that might have been an issue.
I think it was a mixture of things. I think actually we chose the wrong people, and you learn from your mistakes.
Mm,
Um, People who have got a hunger and, have got more potential are always better. I mean, one of the questions I always asked in interviews on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you feel you are in terms of your personal development? And they said 10, you know, that was not for us. If they said 4, wow, that's great. If
mm,
you're a 4 just now, there's a lot of potential. So there was that mistake. But you're right, because I think, your law partnership is like your second family.
mm.
And, if you think, being adopted by another family, you'd have all sorts of support from social work, etc. Um, and,
Yeah.
going to a law firm, you may understand the job well, but everything operates in a different way. Culture's different, behaviors are different.
Mm.
So, I think it's something that has to be invested in.
Yes, and I think you mentioned behaviours and cultures, and I think there's always a perception from the acquiring firm that the lateral should just adapt to the new firm's culture, which is obviously correct. But I think some acquiring firms miss out on the fact that the lateral may be able to bring some facets of their previous culture, which actually could be additive to the new firm. I find that quite a lot, although it's obviously you've got to play it carefully. If you arrive in and say, I often had this last week with someone who consistently apparently saying, we did it like this in my previous firm, we did it like that in my previous firm. So I
Yeah,
think someone eventually said, well, if it was so good, why did you move? Which is a
yeah,
good question in those
yeah, yeah,
circumstances. But I do think firms sometimes miss out on adapting their culture to good points that laterals bring.
yeah.
Great.
Yeah, no, 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 that's right. I think we learned a lot from people who joined us from other firms,
Mm.
and it's getting that balance right. Keeping your eyes and ears open, but you can't adapt your culture to suit every
No.
situation, and it's getting that balance right is really important.
Yes. So going back to you personally, what's the best moment you've had as a partner and or leader? There could be more than one, and the worst. And again, there could be more than one, and why?
Yeah, like Lauren Laverne's guests on Desert Island Discs, Can I Cheat?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not really a best moment. I think the best phase, as a
Mm,
partner was the journey, that you know that the leadership team took at Burness, leading it from being a respectable mid-market firm to being a leading firm. And
mm,
that was so exciting. There's so many elements to it. It was about getting the sense that the ownership of the firm wasn't the equity partners, but everybody was a stakeholder in the firm.
mm,
It was
mm.
getting this idea of moving out of working in silos to, having a shared adventure. It was, in terms of our branding, having an authenticity and an excitement and playfulness in the way we projected ourselves. So that journey was fantastic, so it wasn't a moment. It took a period of years. But for me, that would be the sort of highlight of my career. And the
Okay.
worst, well, I have recurring dreams, even now, having been out of practice for 7 years, waking up in the morning and, or not waking up in the middle of the night, thinking about a case which I've forgotten to prepare for, or
Right.
a file that I haven't looked at. So my worst moments tend to be imaginary. I'm sure there were some really bad moments along the way, but it's more these nightmares that I have about, cases that don't exist. So that's a very unsatisfactory answer to your question, I'm afraid.
So did you have those dreams when you were actually a litigator, or they since you stopped being a
No,
litigator?
since I stopped, I'm not lying, I had one last night, and I have
Right.
them quite often. So I don't know. My wife's a psychotherapist. I should ask her why
You
I
should
get
def
them.
I was about to say, I think I have an idea what those might be, but I'd be very interested to hear what your wife says. It's interesting you've never mentioned them to her.
No, I'll ask
Keep
her
them out
after
of
this
bed in the
call.
morning. Okay. Um, so if you had your time again, what would you do differently?
Again, getting back to my wife, she always encouraged me, just work 2% less. So
Mm,
my regrets are the personal ones.
yes.
The school concert I didn't go to, because there was a business development event to go to, and
Mm,
the sports day that I missed because, I was out of the country or whatever. So I think you have to work very hard, but I
mm,
think, balancing your home life is so important. And I think that, if I was doing it all over again, I'd turn down the volume a wee bit in my sort of
mm.
professional commitment, and have concentrated, a bit more on the family. Happily, I've got a great relationship, with my wife and my kids, but working that hard came at a cost. So that's the thing that I would change.
You're not the first person to say that, and in fact, on another episode, someone was opened up tremendously about that, what you just talked about, and how actually it led to him being divorced, which
Mm,
obviously it didn't
yeah,
in your case, and so how
yeah,
he would definitely dial it down slightly.
yeah.
I wonder if it's one of those things easy to say in hindsight, but at the time, it's tricky, isn't it,
It
to do
is,
that?
but I think it's driven by the sense of guilt and also competition,
Yes.
which is, I mean, this is about being beyond billable hours.
Yes.
But, it gets very competitive. I think of course, the billable hours are incredibly important,
Mm,
but that's not the only contribution that one makes.
mm.
And I think that, if one's focus, if we step back a bit, and thought in a more, I don't know, holistic way about the contribution that you make to a firm, it might lead to a more balanced approach to practice.
Yes, I think there's always an argument, isn't there, because as to whether obviously lawyers, in the City of London in particular, get paid a huge amount of money now, and there's a feeling I think from some people as well, if you're going to get paid that money and you have to work every weekend, that's the price you need to pay. If you don't want to work every weekend, then go to a firm where you get paid less, but you'll have more of a life. But the question of whether the client drives the demands of the lawyer, or whether the lawyer volunteers to actually do the deal or do the case in an unrealistic time frame, I was never quite sure as a recruiter when I heard all this, which way it was driven really, which who was driving what.
Yeah, no, you're right. But if I think back at my career, did I make more of a contribution working X hundred hours, or X thousand hours, or was it bringing along that associate who,
Mm,
down the line was producing many more hours than I could? It's balance. There's a sense of balance that you have to get, and I think
mm,
if you're just, myopically focused on the number of hours you're doing, I'm not convinced that you're actually making the biggest contribution to your firm that you can.
Yes, no, I agree. So, I mean, that's very wise words, and I'm sure you've imparted them as a mentor to others along the way. And I'm interested in what mentors you may have had in your career. And some people have named them on this podcast.
Yeah.
Some people haven't, and just referred to them generically. But feel free to name them, and what key piece of advice they gave you to do or not to do.
Well, I've had, I suppose, three mentors in my career. When it was at Alexander Stone, which I say was a boutique firm,
Yeah,
my the senior partner, Alfie Phillips, who's no longer with us, was by far the best lawyer. With the greatest respect to everybody else I worked with afterwards, best lawyer I'd ever come across. Just
mm,
fantastic, and everything had to be perfect before it went out the door. The comma had to be in the right place, no
okay,
split infinitives, um, and he was also utterly focused on integrity, everything. And so he was amazing in terms of teaching me, the quality of
mm,
lawyering. And the founder of the firm, Alexander Stone's later Sir Alexander Stone, I mean, he was an amazing entrepreneur. I think he invented networking. I mean, his background's interesting if you've got a minute. So he had
yes,
gone to university as a mature student. He'd been an auctioneer, and with the little money that he had when he graduated, he rented an office, bought a desk and three chairs, and spent the
right,
rest going steerage on the maiden voyage of the Queen Elizabeth to New York and back. And he used the
okay.
journey to pick up a client base, which was amazing.
Seriously, he actually
That's
planned
that's
that.
that is absolutely what he did.
Wow.
Absolutely. He had no connections, nothing, and that's what he did. So he taught me entrepreneurship. So I was incredibly lucky. As I say, Stone and Co was a small firm, but it was an incredible talent there. And the third mentor that I had, who I'm eternally grateful to, is a guy called Kevin McBrien,
Okay.
who, when I became chair at Burness, I'd been working with him on something, and he'd been chief executive of a large insurance company. So he
Mm,
was used to dealing with businesses of a massive scale,
mm,
and he taught me a lot. He was fantastic, and the biggest thing that he taught me was that a good leader gets it right 7 times out of 10. If you
okay.
get it right 10 times out of 10, you're not trying enough things. So
Mm,
the trick is to try things and to retreat with humility
mm,
quickly if they don't
mm,
work, but don't be scared to try them. And
mm.
that was the best single piece of advice that I've ever received.
That's interesting. I love that story about your guy going on the steerage as well, steerage class of the
Yes,
Queen
yes.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, yeah.
And he picked up and that's how the firm started, basically.
Oh, and that's how the firm started. And the client base that he picked up was amazing. It was amazing. I mean, he absolutely punched above his weight. He was a fantastic salesman. And again, it was amazing.
You should write a book about him and have that. It could be turned into a film. I can see Leonardo DiCaprio or someone like that playing him straight away.
Yeah, yeah. No,
Um,
I mean, he was an amazing character. Say he was knighted for his contributions to charity. He reinvented himself after law as a banker. Um, he remained as a consultant in the firm, and he finally retired aged 89 and said it was the worst decision he'd ever made.
sounds like we're better off in a US firm where he could have carried on literally until he dropped
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
on that. Okay, well, that's really interesting. Thank you for sharing those mentors. And then the third one as well, I agree. I think a lot of leaders perhaps don't are too risk averse. I can remember, I won't name him, but I can remember the managing partner of a very well-known law firm, and we had been asked by, well, I will name him because he won't care, Nigel Knowles, Sir Nigel
Oh yeah,
Knowles, to approach
yeah.
this managing partner with a view to a merger in the days when Nigel was at his peak at DLA Piper. And so I remember ringing up this said managing partner of a well-known law firm. And he was potentially interested, but he said, I can't meet him in pub. I don't think I can meet him because I can't be seen to be meeting him by my partners because they'll all think, what is he doing? And I remember saying, "But isn't your job as managing partner to do things, to have meetings which may or may not come to anything, and which, as you said earlier on, Philip, a third of your partners will think you're completely nutty doing.
Yeah.
Isn't that?" I obviously tried to say it as nice way as possible. Isn't that part of your job? And eventually, I had to. We agreed he would go around to, or Nigel would go around to his house. I think that's what happened. But I remember thinking, "Blimey, that's ridiculous to be that concerned. You're obviously not very confident in your own position, really, if you're that concerned about being seen with someone." So, what your third mentor said ties in with that. I have to say,
I should say my wife is a mentor as well. I remember, I said she practiced as a psychotherapist.
yes,
There's a book on her bookshelf, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. And sometimes as a leader, you have to do it.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. No, I think that's very good lesson. So you got to 2018, Philip, and
Yeah.
I don't know, I can't work out how old you were or what the situation was in 2018, but you stopped there.
Yeah.
So how easy was it to come to that decision to off ramp from being the chair of the firm and to give up being a lawyer?
So I had done, I think, golly, 3, 4 terms when constitutionally we were only supposed to do two.
Okay.
Um, and Ian Lottie, who's our managing partner, and I both felt that we had done everything that we should do, and it was time
Mm,
for a refresh. Um, the firm offered me a very generous consultancy role, which
mm,
initially I thought that I would take. And then when I reflected on it, without being morbid, I thought if I was to drop dead and all that I had done in my life was being a lawyer, I
mm,
feel I'd kind of cheated myself. And I felt
yeah.
that there were other things to do. And so and also, I'm a curious person. I
Mm,
thought that there are other things I wanted to see and do. So I decided to go cold turkey. I gave up my practicing certificate, gave up law, and I found it actually remarkably easy. Um, I, you know, retain, strong friendships with people in the firm, my old firm.
yeah.
But I've never had a desire to be a lawyer again. And I did lots of other things. I took 6 months off. I couldn't, I didn't realize how exhausted I was. I was
Mm,
absolutely shattered. You don't realize until you stop. And I can actually remember I was in Battery Park in New York, and I suddenly felt full of life again, and decided I wanted to do other things. And there were a number of opportunities that came my way, and a number of opportunities that I created for myself. And so for the last 7 years, I suppose, I've been
mm.
doing a variety of things.
So did you have those things? So someone else I spoke to said that they kind of planned it in the sense that they thought, I don't want to go cold turkey. I want to have things that I'm already starting to do. So, the writing and being on the boards, were you doing those already as a lawyer or not?
I had been on a couple of boards. I chaired the Glasgow
Mm,
School of Art a while back, but I think what was instructive to me, a friend said to me, his advice was, don't look out of the window in the morning so that you leave something to do in the afternoon. And that was my idea of hell, because I really need to keep myself occupied. So going full circle, I'd always wanted to be a journalist, and
yes, yes,
I was lucky in that I knew the editor of the Times in Scotland, and he asked me to do a piece for him. But it was legally related, and
mm,
then he asked if I would write a weekly column for the Times, which I did for a couple of years until about business, not about law actually.
yeah,
And I love doing that, but then thought I was starting to sound like a bit of a caricature of myself. Um,
right.
and since then, I write more occasionally on things that I find interesting. Um, and I wanted to do some consultancy, some
Yes.
non-legal consultancy. and there were a few gigs that I got, which I enjoyed. I was approached by, a couple of boards in the voluntary sector that wanted me to, you know, help them. I did that. Um, so it was, and then Saxon Bamfylde
Yes.
approached me. I'd mentioned that I had been chair of the Glasgow School of Art, and we'd worked with Saxon Bamfylde in finding our new chief executive. And when I'd left the firm, Stephen Bamfylde said to keep in touch, and which I did. And a few years later, they asked if I would help them set up their professional services practice, which has been great fun. I have and continue to really to enjoy it because it's reconnected me with the legal market without
Yes.
having to be a lawyer. Uh,
No, it's obviously where you and I first met as well.
but
Yeah.
absolutely, and I think next to rock and roll, I think being a lawyer is one of the most exciting things to do. It's a fascinating market, and I've really enjoyed re-engaging with the people I know, providing advice, providing perspective, you know, helping to see through strategies. So it is great fun.
And so in that role, I mean, looking ahead now, although you're not a practicing lawyer because you are at Saxton Banfield with that role, so what factors, market or otherwise, do you think are going to affect partner and firm success going forward? Thinking of things like AI, agile working. What factors do you see affecting things?
I think we're at a really fascinating point, but truthfully, I think we're always at a fascinating point
Yeah.
because the market evolves. Um, I think what we're seeing is that firms who actually know who they are and
Yes.
focus on doing what they do really well, are the ones that succeed. There's no magic formula. There's not a sort of cookie cutter, shape of success for legal practice.
Mm.
It's knowing what you do and doing it really well. I think it makes a difference. But I think that has to be combined with having imagination and flexibility. Um, actually being able to pivot, because there are changes in the market,
Yeah.
actually, being able to take bold decisions, when they come along and when there are
Mm.
opportunities and not, being scared of them, coming back to my seven
Mm. Yes.
out of 10 issue. And I think, and this one may sound peculiar, but I think it's also deciding what you're not going to do.
Mm.
I mentioned my love of cars, and Colin Chapman, that's my third quote, who was the founder of Lotus. He said that if you have a big engine, you'll be fast in the straights. If you're light, you'll be fast around the whole track. And I think it's actually having the confidence sometimes to cut things from the business, and I'm seeing that more often now,
Mm.
thinking about this is good, but it doesn't really fit in with our principal aim. Let's
Mm.
unburden ourselves and let someone else do that. So I
Yeah.
think, having the wisdom, to be able to say we're not going to do that anymore is
Mm.
important. And
Mm.
AI, um, I think we don't know yet, but I think what AI does, it, provides a sort of mathematical analysis of a probability. It, it
Mm.
it it doesn't use logic or deduction or imagination, and it's deciding or working out how you can make the contribution that AI can't, but how you can use that, to do the heavy lifting work which doesn't require these attributes. And I do use it myself. But I don't think we've properly defined, what its role is going to be going forward. And I think the firms that, sort that out, are going to do well. I think the firms that ignore it will fail. And I think the firms that think that it solves every problem will also fail. So it's getting that
Mm.
balance right.
And in terms of agile working, I mean, I know, when you started work, when I started work, that wasn't something what's your feeling if you were still chair now, and obviously you'd gone through the pandemic and there was much more agile working going on. What do you feel about it?
I think it's a balance again.
Mm,
I was talking about, Alec and Alfie being my mentors. Um, I wouldn't have picked up what I did, if I'd been sitting at my laptop at home. It was
mm,
actually being in the office and listening to them on the phone and having an informal chat with them,
mm,
at the photocopier. And I think that's the downside of agile working. You
mm.
miss out on these accidental conversations and you don't learn to the same extent from osmosis. On the other hand, you know, I think presenteeism, is very dangerous.
Yes,
People who leave their jackets over
yes.
their chairs so that people think they're in the office or whatever. I think it's about balance.
Mm,
I think
mm,
it's about um, having the imagination to say, yes, I really want this person to work with us. I recognize that they have other calls in their life. We'll find a way to work around that. But at the
mm.
same time, I think having them, not present um, is something which especially at an early stage in your career, you'll miss out on. So
Yeah,
I think it's about balance. I don't think it's a one size fits all.
excellent. Well, look, that's been really interesting, Philip. I'm going to move on to our two last questions that we ask every guest, which, as I've said before, sort of slightly pilfered from a different podcast, but hopefully they don't mind. The first one being, what are your three non-negotiable behaviors for you and your team to ensure success?
I suppose rather than the three non-negotiable behaviors, you see, I never answer your questions. I see,
You should have been a politician.
well, that could be my next career. Um,
Indeed.
I used to have three behaviors that I'd look for, in people before I'd hire them.
Yeah.
The first one was that I had to like them sufficiently that I'd get in earlier train through to Edinburgh to enjoy their company. So that's about
Correct.
likability. The second was that they had to have a passion. Didn't have to be a passion for law, but they had to be passionate people, people who had that energy and excitement, and were doing more than ticking
Mm,
boxes. And the third one, which I think that people ignore to the cost, was that they had to be better than me at something. And I think that unfortunately, people are scared of recruiting people who are better than them.
mm.
They feel threatened by that. So I think these are my three non-negotiables.
Excellent. Likability, passion, and being better at something. That's I like those.
Yeah,
Um, uh,
the third one's not difficult.
and what's your one golden rule to being a successful partner?
I think it's actually acting with integrity.
Yes, going back to
It's,
where we started. Mm,
absolutely, it's doing what is right. I not showing favor, not getting involved in politics, but always doing what's right. Even when you make a mistake, fessing up to it
mm.
early on, having the humility, if you've got something wrong to, confront it, but always acting with integrity. I think that undoubtedly.
Wonderful. Well, look, Philip, thank you so much for all your your insights. They've been absolutely fascinating, and thank you for coming on the show. It's just been very, very enjoyable to hear everything that you've said, and thanks for making the time for speaking to us.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure, and my apologies again for not answering your questions. And I'll phone up Downing Street now and see if they've got a job for me.
Well, they might well have one quite soon. Okay. And so look, join us on our next episode of Beyond Billables Lessons from Top Law Firm Partners, where hopefully we'll hear from another top law firm partner who will share the secrets of their success. See you next time.